At my niece's birthday party, mother-in-law said, "Everyone has children, only you are useless to us." My husband snorted exactly, "You are trash and do not deserve to stand beside me," and that evening he kicked me out. Sister-in-law added, "Finally someone's being brutally honest about her real worth." Brother-in-law agreed, "Some wives just don't fulfill their basic purpose in marriage." Father-in-law nodded, "Some women just don't deserve their place in the family." Aunt added, "Some people just can't do what nature intended." 3 years later I returned to my hometown with twins in my arms. Their faces when they learned who their father was. My name is Stephanie, and 3 years ago, I was married to Blake Thompson, living in what I thought was my forever home with his family who had initially welcomed me with open arms. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was to believe their kindness was genuine. The day that shattered my world started like any other Saturday. It was Blake's niece Violet's 6th birthday party, and the entire Thompson family had gathered at his parents' house for the celebration. The backyard was decorated with pink balloons and streamers, and children's laughter filled the air as they ran around playing games. I had spent the entire morning helping my mother-in-law, Edith, prepare food and set up decorations, genuinely excited to celebrate little Violet's special day. Blake and I had been trying to conceive for 3 years. We'd been through multiple fertility specialists, countless tests, and treatments that left me emotionally and physically drained. The doctors couldn't find anything definitively wrong with either of us, which somehow made it worse. What we didn't know then was that sometimes fertility issues can be related to stress and the overall health of the relationship. The constant pressure, the monthly disappointments, and the growing tension between us had created an environment where conception became increasingly unlikely. The uncertainty was crushing, and the monthly disappointments had taken their toll on our marriage. Blake had grown increasingly distant and cold, though I attributed it to the stress we were both under. As the party progressed, I noticed the subtle glances and whispered conversations between the family members. Blake's sister Jessica kept shooting me looks across the yard while bouncing her 1-year-old son on her hip. His brother Wayne's wife, Amanda, was visibly pregnant with their second child, and she kept placing her hand on her belly in what seemed like a deliberate display. Even Blake's elderly Aunt Helen, who had always been sweet to me, seemed to be avoiding eye contact. The moment that changed everything came when all the children were gathered around Violet as she opened her presents. I was standing slightly apart from the family circle, taking photos with my phone, when Edith's voice cut through the cheerful atmosphere like a knife. "Look at all these beautiful children," she said, her voice carrying across the yard loud enough for everyone to hear. "Everyone in this family has been blessed with children." Her eyes found mine with a coldness I'd never seen before. "Everyone has children, only you are useless to us." The words hit me like a physical blow. The entire party seemed to freeze, and I felt every pair of eyes turn to look at me. My face burned with humiliation as I tried to process what she had just said. Before I could even formulate a response, Blake, my husband who was supposed to defend me, let out a derisive snort. "Exactly," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are trash and do not deserve to stand beside me." I stared at him in shock, unable to believe that these cruel words were coming from the man I had loved and supported through everything. The man I had married, thinking we were partners facing life's challenges together. But he wasn't finished destroying me in front of his entire family. Jessica, emboldened by her mother and brother's cruelty, decided to add her own venom to the attack. "Finally someone's being brutally honest about her real worth," she said with a satisfied smirk, adjusting her baby on her hip like a trophy. Wayne, never one to be left out of family conversations, nodded gravely and added his own painful observation. "Some wives just don't fulfill their basic purpose in marriage," he said, as if delivering some profound wisdom rather than twisting the knife deeper into my heart. Edith's husband, Robert, had always been a man of few words, but apparently he felt this was an important enough occasion to break his usual silence. "Some women just don't deserve their place in the family," he said with a decisive nod, as if my fate had been sealed by committee. Even Aunt Helen, who had always seemed genuinely fond of me, felt compelled to join the chorus of condemnation. "Some people just can't do what nature intended," she said with a shake of her head, her voice filled with what sounded like pity but felt like contempt. I stood there, surrounded by people who had once claimed to love me, feeling completely alone and devastated. The children continued playing, oblivious to the adult cruelty unfolding around them, and I envied their innocence. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that fertility issues weren't anyone's fault, that we had been trying everything possible. But the words wouldn't come. I was too shocked, too hurt, too overwhelmed by the coordinated attack from every direction. That evening, after the party guests had gone home and the decorations had been taken down, Blake made his intentions crystal clear. He didn't even wait until we got home. Right there in his parents' driveway, in front of his family who watched from the windows, he told me to pack my things and get out of his life. He said he was done wasting time on someone who couldn't even perform the most basic function of a wife. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as tears blurred my vision. Our house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. I packed my belongings mechanically, still unable to fully process what had happened. Blake returned hours later, drunk and even more vicious than he'd been at the party. He made it clear that he wanted a divorce and that I should be grateful he was giving me the chance to leave with some dignity intact. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Blake had already consulted a lawyer, and I was too emotionally destroyed to fight effectively for anything. He kept the house, most of our shared assets, and made sure to spread his version of our story throughout our social circle. According to him, I was a selfish woman who had wasted his prime years and refused to accept that I was the problem in our marriage. The weeks following that devastating birthday party were a blur of legal papers, cruel phone calls, and social isolation. Blake's lawyer was aggressive and ruthless, painting me as a vindictive ex-wife who was trying to steal assets from a man who had wasted years on a defective woman. Every interaction with the legal system felt like another layer of humiliation piled onto the already crushing weight of rejection. What made it worse was discovering how quickly our mutual friends chose sides. People I had considered close friends suddenly stopped returning my calls. Couples we had socialized with for years began excluding me from gatherings, apparently buying into Blake's narrative that I was bitter and difficult. I learned through social media that they were still including Blake in everything: dinner parties, game nights, weekend trips, while I became persona non grata. The most painful betrayal came from my former best friend, Lisa, who had been my maid of honor and whom I had supported through her own difficult divorce 2 years earlier. She called me one evening, ostensibly to check on how I was doing, but it quickly became clear she was fishing for information to report back to others. "Stephanie, honey," she said in that fake sweet voice people use when they're about to deliver bad news, "I just want you to know that we all understand you're going through a hard time, but some of the things you've been saying about Blake and his family, well, they're making people uncomfortable." I hadn't been saying anything about Blake or his family to anyone. I was too humiliated and heartbroken to even talk about what had happened. "What things, Lisa?" "I haven't been talking to anyone about my marriage." "Well, the story about them attacking you at Violet's birthday party," she said. "I mean, Edith can be a little direct, but calling you useless? That seems a bit extreme. And Blake would never call you trash. He's been telling everyone how concerned he is about your mental state." The gaslighting was so blatant it took my breath away. They weren't just content with destroying my marriage, they were now rewriting history to make me look like a delusional liar. I realized in that moment that Blake and his family had orchestrated a character assassination campaign, and people were buying it. "Lisa, I know what happened to me," I said quietly. "I know what they said. I know how they treated me." "Oh, honey," she said with patronizing pity, "maybe you're remembering it worse than it was because you're so upset about the divorce. Trauma can make us misremember things." That conversation was the final straw. I realized that not only had I lost my husband and his family, but I was losing my entire support system because they preferred his version of reality to the truth. The isolation was suffocating, and I began to understand why some people never recover from this kind of systematic destruction. The financial aspect was equally devastating. Blake's lawyer had frozen our joint accounts immediately, leaving me with only the small personal account I had maintained for my freelance work. I had to hire my own attorney with money I couldn't afford, only to watch helplessly as she advised me to accept whatever settlement Blake offered because fighting would cost more than I could possibly win. In the end, I walked away from a 7-year marriage with my car, my personal belongings, and about $8,000. Blake got the house we had bought together, the furniture we had chosen together, and even the dog we had rescued from the shelter. The final insult was that he wanted to keep Rex, our golden retriever, claiming that I wouldn't be able to provide proper care for a pet in my unstable condition. I spent my last night in what had been my home sleeping on an air mattress in the empty living room, with Rex curled up beside me. In the morning, I would have to say goodbye to him too, along with everything else that had made up my life for the past 7 years. The moving truck arrived at dawn, and I watched strangers pack up the remnants of my existence into boxes. Blake had made sure to be absent for this final humiliation, but his mother Edith showed up, ostensibly to oversee the process but really to twist the knife one more time. "Stephanie, dear," she said with false sweetness, "I just want you to know that we don't harbor any hard feelings toward you. We understand that some women just aren't built for marriage and motherhood. There's no shame in accepting your limitations." Even then, even after everything, she couldn't resist one final cruel barb disguised as kindness. I looked at this woman who had once hugged me and told me she was so happy to have me as a daughter-in-law, and I felt something inside me harden into steel. "Edith," I said quietly, "someday you're going to realize exactly what you've lost. And when that day comes, remember that this was your choice." She laughed dismissively. "Oh, honey, we haven't lost anything. Blake deserves a real woman who can give him the family he wants." Those were the last words I heard from any member of the Thompson family before I left town with nothing but my car, some clothes, and what little savings I had managed to keep in my personal account. I couldn't bear to stay in a place where everyone would know me as the woman who couldn't have children, the failure who had been publicly humiliated and cast out by her husband's family. I drove north for hours until I reached Portland, Oregon, a city where nobody knew my story. I rented a small studio apartment and found work as a freelance graphic designer, taking whatever projects I could find to pay rent and buy groceries. The first few months were the darkest period of my life. I barely ate, rarely left the apartment except for necessities, and spent most of my time crying or staring blankly at the walls. But slowly, very slowly, I began to heal. I started therapy with Dr. Patricia Williams, a kind woman who helped me understand that what had happened to me wasn't my fault. She helped me see that Blake and his family's cruelty said everything about their character and nothing about my worth as a person. I began to rebuild my sense of self-worth and started taking better care of my physical and mental health. About 10 months after my divorce was finalized, I met someone who would change my life completely. His name was Lance Reed, and he was a successful architect who had hired me to design marketing materials for his firm. He was tall, with kind brown eyes and an easy smile that made me feel comfortable from our first meeting. Lance was patient with me as I slowly opened up about my past. He listened without judgment when I told him about my fertility struggles and the devastating way my marriage had ended. He never made me feel broken or defective, instead treating me with a gentleness and respect I'd forgotten I deserved. Our relationship developed gradually. Lance never pushed for more than I was ready to give, and he made it clear that he cared about me as a person, not as a potential baby-making machine. When I finally felt ready to be intimate with someone again, it was with Lance, and it was beautiful in a way that my mechanical, pressure-filled attempts at conception with Blake had never been. 8 months into our relationship, something miraculous happened. I missed my period, and for the first time in years, a pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. I stared at it in disbelief, then took 3 more tests to be sure. I was pregnant. Lance's reaction was everything Blake should have been but never was. He was thrilled, supportive, and immediately started talking about our future together. He proposed to me at my first prenatal appointment, saying he wanted our child to be born into a family where they were truly wanted and loved. Our wedding was small and intimate, nothing like the elaborate affair Blake and I had planned. We exchanged vows in a beautiful garden ceremony with just a few close friends as witnesses. Lance's family, who lived across the country, welcomed me warmly and made it clear that they considered me a blessing in their son's life. At my 20-week ultrasound, we received another shock. We were having twins. 2 healthy babies who were growing perfectly. Lance was over the moon, and I felt like my heart might burst with happiness and gratitude. After years of feeling broken and worthless, I was not only pregnant but carrying 2 precious lives. The pregnancy was textbook perfect. I took excellent care of myself, attended every appointment, and followed all the doctor's recommendations. Lance was an amazing partner throughout, attending every appointment, reading pregnancy books, and preparing our home for the baby's arrival. On a snowy February morning, after 12 hours of labor, I gave birth to 2 beautiful, healthy children, a boy we named James and a girl we named Lily. They were perfect in every way, with Lance's brown eyes and what appeared to be my stubborn chin. Holding them for the first time, I felt a completeness I had never experienced before. Lance was an incredible father from day one. He changed diapers, took night feedings, and never once complained about the sleepless nights or the chaos that comes with twins. His love for our children was evident in everything he did, and watching him with James and Lily made me fall in love with him even deeper. We settled into our new life as a family of 4. Lance's architecture firm was thriving, and my freelance design business had grown to the point where I could work from home while caring for the babies. We bought a beautiful house in a family-friendly neighborhood, complete with a big backyard where the twins could play as they grew. For 4 years, we lived in our bubble of happiness. James and Lily grew into bright, curious toddlers who brought joy to everyone they met. Lance's parents visited regularly and absolutely adored their grandchildren. My own parents, who had been devastated by what Blake's family had put me through, were thrilled to have grandchildren and were wonderful, loving grandparents. But as the twins approached their 4th birthday, I began to feel a strange pull toward my hometown. Through carefully maintained connections with a few loyal friends who had never bought into Blake's lies, I had been getting occasional updates about my former life. I knew that Blake was still unmarried and childless. His sister Jessica had divorced her husband after he cheated on her, and his brother Wayne's wife had left him after their 2nd child was born, taking both kids with her. The Thompson family's perfect facade was beginning to crumble. Lance and I had talked about possibly moving closer to my parents, who were getting older and had expressed a desire to spend more time with their grandchildren. When Lance's firm offered him the opportunity to open a new branch office in my home state, it seemed like fate was presenting us with a perfect opportunity. We decided to move back, not because I wanted revenge, but because it felt like the right time to close that chapter of my life and show myself that I could return to the place where I'd experienced such pain as a stronger, happier person. The house we bought was in an upscale neighborhood on the opposite side of town from where the Thompsons lived, but it was still the same city where I'd grown up and where everyone knew everyone's business. Word of our arrival spread quickly through the community, and I knew it was only a matter of time before news reached Blake and his family. I had prepared myself for the inevitable encounter, but I wasn't prepared for how it would actually unfold. Lance and I were at the local farmers market with James and Lily on a Saturday morning, enjoying the beautiful spring weather and letting the twins pick out apples from one of the vendors. That's when I saw her, Edith Thompson, my former mother-in-law, standing near the flower stand. She looked older, more worn than I remembered, and there was something different about her demeanor. She was alone, which was unusual for her. She had always been surrounded by family members at public events. For a moment, our eyes met across the crowded market, and I saw recognition dawn on her face. Then her gaze shifted to Lance, who was kneeling down helping Lily choose between red and green apples, and to James, who was chattering excitedly about the puppies at the pet rescue booth nearby. Edith's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then what looked like shock as she took in the sight of my obviously happy family. I watched as she approached slowly, almost hesitantly, her usual confident swagger replaced by something that looked like uncertainty. "Stephanie?" she said, her voice much quieter than I remembered. "Is that really you?" "Hello, Edith," I replied calmly, my hand automatically moving to rest on Lily's shoulder as she leaned against my leg. Edith's eyes kept darting between Lance and the twins, and I could see her trying to do the math in her head. "These are your children?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said simply. "These are my children. James and Lily, they're 4 years old." The color drained from Edith's face as the implications of what I'd said hit her. 4 years old meant they had been conceived shortly after Blake had kicked me out for being useless and unable to have children. Lance, sensing the tension in the conversation, stood up and moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine in a gesture of quiet support. "I'm Lance Reed," he said politely, extending his free hand to Edith. "Stephanie's husband." Edith shook his hand mechanically, her eyes still fixed on the twins in obvious shock. "Your husband?" she repeated faintly. "We've been married for over 4 years," I said, enjoying the way her face crumpled as she processed this information. "Lance is their father." At that moment, James decided to assert his presence in the conversation. "Daddy, can we get the red apples and the green ones?" he asked, tugging on Lance's shirt with the fearless confidence of a well-loved 3-year-old. "Of course, buddy," Lance said, his voice warm with affection as he ruffled James's hair. "We'll get both kinds so you and Lily can compare." Lily, not to be outdone by her brother, piped up with her own request. "Mama, can we see the puppies again before we go home?" "Maybe after we finish shopping," I told her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Edith watched these exchanges with growing distress, and I could see her mind working furiously. She was realizing that not only was I not infertile, but I was obviously thriving with a loving husband and beautiful children while her own son remained alone and bitter. I need to go," Edith said suddenly, backing away from us. "It was nice seeing you, Stephanie." She hurried away without waiting for a response, and I watched her retreating figure with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Lance squeezed my hand gently. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his eyes searching my face with concern. "I'm perfect," I told him honestly, and I meant it. Standing there in the sunshine with my husband and children, I felt more complete and content than I ever had during my marriage to Blake. But that encounter was just the beginning. Word of my return, complete with a successful new husband and twin children, spread through our small town like wildfire. Within days, it seemed like everyone knew that Stephanie Peterson, now Stephanie Reed, was back, and she was definitely not the broken, childless woman who had left town in disgrace 3 years earlier. The full reckoning came 2 weeks later at the grocery store. I was shopping alone while Lance watched the twins, taking advantage of a rare moment of peace to stock up on supplies. I was in the cereal aisle, comparing prices on oatmeal, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, well, well. If it isn't little Stephanie." I turned around to find Jessica Thompson standing there, looking significantly less polished than I remembered. Her hair was unkempt, she had dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes looked like they hadn't been ironed in weeks. The confident, superior woman who had once looked down on me was nowhere to be seen. "Hello, Jessica," I said calmly, continuing with my shopping. "I heard you were back in town," she said, her voice carrying that same nasty edge it had always had. "I heard some interesting stories about you having kids now. Hard to believe, considering." "Considering what?" I asked, turning to face her directly. Jessica's bravado faltered slightly under my steady gaze, but she pressed on. "Considering we all know you couldn't have kids with Blake. So either you were lying about your fertility issues, or..." She left the implication hanging in the air. "Or what, Jessica?" I asked, my voice remaining calm despite the anger building in my chest. Or they're not really yours, she said with a nasty smile. Maybe you adopted them to make yourself look good, or maybe your new husband had them with someone else and you're just playing mommy. I felt a flash of rage at her words, but years of therapy and the confidence that came from being truly happy had taught me how to handle people like Jessica. Instead of rising to her bait, I simply smiled. You know what, Jessica? You can believe whatever makes you feel better about your own life, I said. But the truth is, James and Lily are mine and Lance's biological children. Conceived naturally, carried and delivered by me, and raised with more love than you can probably imagine. Jessica's face twisted with something ugly. That's impossible. The doctor said there was nothing definitively wrong with either Blake or me, I interrupted. Sometimes these things are about more than just biology. Sometimes they're about stress, environment, and the relationship between the parents. The implication of what I was saying hit Jessica like a slap. She was realizing that my inability to conceive with Blake might not have been a medical issue at all, but rather a result of the toxic environment I'd been living in. You're lying, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? I asked. Would you like to see photos? Birth certificates? I have plenty of proof, though I don't owe you any explanations about my family. Jessica stood there speechless, and I could see her processing the implications of what this meant for her brother's narrative about our marriage. If I could have children, and had them easily with someone else, then Blake's story about me being defective was exposed as the lie it had always been. I finished my shopping and walked past Jessica without another word, leaving her standing in the cereal aisle looking lost and confused. But the story doesn't end there. The ultimate confrontation came a month later, at the annual Memorial Day festival in the town park. It was a community-wide event that everyone attended, and I knew the Thompson family would be there. Lance and I had discussed whether we should avoid it, but we decided that we had as much right to enjoy community events as anyone else. We arrived at the festival as a family, Lance pushing Lily in her stroller while James walked between us, holding both our hands. The twins were dressed in matching red, white, and blue outfits, and they were excited about the face painting booth and the petting zoo. I spotted the Thompson family almost immediately. They were set up at their usual spot near the bandstand, with Edith and Robert in lawn chairs while Jessica sat on a blanket nearby. Blake was there too, and seeing him again after 3 years was surreal. He looked terrible. His hair was thinning, he'd gained significant weight, and there was something defeated about his posture. He was alone, no wife, no girlfriend, no children running around him like there were around every other family at the festival. It was Robert who noticed us first. He nudged Edith, who looked up and immediately saw our little family making our way through the crowd. I watched as she pointed us out to the others, and suddenly all their attention was focused on us. We found our own spot on the grass not far from where they were sitting, and Lance spread out our blanket while I got the twins settled with snacks and juice boxes. I could feel the Thompson family's eyes on us the entire time, but I focused on my children and husband, enjoying their excitement about the festival activities. James was fascinated by a nearby balloon artist, and Lily was clapping along to the music from the bandstand. Lance was patient with their endless questions and requests, and anyone watching could see that we were a genuinely happy family. That's when Blake finally worked up the courage to approach us. He walked over slowly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking like a man heading to his own execution. "Stephanie," he said when he was close enough to speak without shouting. "Blake," I replied evenly, not bothering to stand up from the blanket. His eyes moved to Lance, who was helping Lily with her juice box, and then to James, who was building a tower with blocks we'd brought from home. "These are your kids?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Yes," I said simply. "James and Lily. They're 3. I watched as he did the same math his mother had done, realizing that I had conceived these children shortly after he'd thrown me out of his life for being unable to have children. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Stephanie, He started, then stopped, apparently unable to find the words. Lance looked up from where he was kneeling beside Lily, taking in the situation instantly. "Hi," he said to Blake. With polite neutrality. "I'm Lance, Stephanie's husband." Blake stared at Lance, taking in his obvious success, his genuine warmth with the children, and the way he looked at me with real love and respect. It was everything Blake had never been, and the contrast was stark. "Daddy, can we go see the horses?" James asked, tugging on Lance's sleeve with typical 3-year-old impatience. "In a few minutes, buddy," Lance said, his voice gentle and patient. "Let Mama finish her sandwich first." The casual, loving interaction between Lance and James was clearly painful for Blake to witness. Here was proof that I was not only capable of having children, but that I was part of a loving family where everyone cared for and supported each other. "How long have you been married?" Blake asked suddenly, the question seeming to burst out of him. 4 years, I answered. "We married when I was pregnant with the twins." The timeline made it clear that I had found love, gotten married, and started a family all while he had remained alone and bitter. The life he had thrown away was flourishing without him. Stephanie, I need to tell you. He began, but I held up my hand to stop him. You don't need to tell me anything, Blake, I said firmly. We have nothing to discuss. But I was wrong, he said desperately. I know I was wrong about everything. The way my family treated you, the things we said. It was horrible. Yes, it was horrible, I agreed. And it showed me exactly who you all really were. By now, the rest of the Thompson family had noticed Blake's conversation with us and had started to migrate in our direction. Edith arrived first, her face pale and drawn as she took in the sight of my thriving family. Stephanie, she said, her voice shaking slightly. We. Oh my God, what have we done? The realization of their cruelty and its consequences was finally hitting all of them. They were seeing that I wasn't broken or defective, I had been in a toxic situation that had prevented me from thriving. Once I was free of that environment, I had immediately found love, and started the family I'd always wanted. Jessica arrived next, looking even more haggard than she had at the grocery store. She stared at James and Lily with obvious shock, finally accepting that they were real, they were mine, and they were proof that everything her family had believed about me was wrong. These are really your biological children? Edith asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I said calmly. Conceived naturally, carried and delivered by me, and raised with love by Lance and me. The full impact of this revelation hit the Thompson family like a physical blow. Not only had they been wrong about my fertility, but they had destroyed their son's marriage over a lie. Blake could have had the family he claimed to want if he had been supportive and loving instead of cruel and demanding. Stephanie, please, Edith said, tears starting to form in her eyes. We made a terrible mistake. We were wrong about everything. Can you ever forgive us? I looked at this woman who had called me useless and worthless in front of an entire party, who had supported her son in throwing me away like trash, and I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, no desire for revenge. Just a sort of sad indifference. I don't need to forgive you, Edith, I said quietly. I've moved on with my life. I have a wonderful husband who loves and respects me, beautiful children who bring me joy every day, and a life filled with happiness and purpose. Your opinion of me doesn't matter anymore. Blake looked absolutely devastated. Stephanie, please. I know I destroyed everything. I know I was the worst kind of husband. But can't we? Isn't there some way? Some way what, Blake? I asked. Some way you can undo 3 years of pain and humiliation? Some way you can take back calling me trash and kicking me out of your life? Some way you can erase the damage you and your family did to my self-worth and mental health? He had no answer for that, because there wasn't one. Lance had been quietly observing this entire exchange while keeping one eye on our children, but now he stood up and moved to stand beside me, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. I think we've heard enough, he said calmly but firmly. Stephanie doesn't owe any of you anything. She's built a beautiful life, and she deserves to enjoy it without being hassled by people who treated her badly in the past. His words carried quiet authority, and it was clear that he wouldn't hesitate to defend his wife if necessary. The Thompson family seemed to recognize that they had no power in this situation, no leverage to demand anything from me. James chose that moment to announce loudly, "Mama, I need to go potty." The mundane reality of parenting broke the tension of the moment, and I stood up to take him to the portable bathrooms near the playground. "Come on, sweetheart," I said, taking his hand. "Let's go find the bathroom." As we walked away, I could hear Edith's voice behind us, shaky with tears. "She's such a good mother. Look how happy those children are." When we returned from the bathroom, the Thompson family had retreated back to their original spot, but I could see them watching us throughout the rest of the festival. They saw Lance patiently teaching James how to throw rings at the game booth. They saw me laughing as Lily got her face painted like a butterfly. They saw us as a family, happy, whole, and complete without any of them. Later that evening, after we'd gotten the twins bathed and settled for the night, Lance and I sat on our back porch with glasses of wine, talking about the day's events. "How are you feeling about seeing them all again?" he asked, his arm around my shoulders as we watched the sunset. "Honestly? I feel sorry for them," I said. "They're all so miserable, and they did it to themselves. Blake threw away a marriage that could have worked if he'd been patient and supportive. His family destroyed their relationship with someone who tried to love them. And for what? Their precious family name? Their need to feel superior?" Lance pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "Their loss was my incredible gain," he said softly. "I can't imagine my life without you and the kids. Do you think they'll try to contact us again?" I asked. "Maybe," he said thoughtfully. "But it doesn't matter. We have our life, our family, our happiness. Nothing they say or do can touch that." He was right. The Thompson family had lost their power over me the moment I walked away 3 years ago. Seeing them again hadn't reopened old wounds, it had simply confirmed that I had made the right choice in leaving and never looking back. The next few weeks brought several attempts from various Thompson family members to reach out to me. Edith called twice, leaving rambling voicemails about how sorry she was and how she wished she could take back everything that had happened. Jessica sent a Facebook message asking if we could meet for coffee to clear the air. Even Blake sent a letter to my parents' house, asking them to forward his apologies and his hope that we could somehow find a way to reconcile. I ignored them all. I had no interest in rehashing the past or in accepting apologies that were clearly motivated by guilt and regret rather than genuine remorse. They hadn't been sorry when they thought I was broken and childless, they were only sorry now that they realized they'd been wrong. Instead, I focused on the life I'd built. Lance's new office was thriving, and we were talking about having another baby. James and Lily were enrolled in a wonderful preschool where they were making friends and learning new things every day. My own design business had grown to the point where I was considering hiring an assistant. 6 months after the Memorial Day encounter, I heard through mutual friends that Blake had started seeing a therapist, and was apparently telling people that he realized he'd been abusive during our marriage. Too little, too late, as far as I was concerned. Self-awareness after the fact doesn't undo the damage that was done. Jessica's life continued to fall apart. She'd lost her job and was struggling financially as a single mother. Edith and Robert's marriage was reportedly strained, with Robert blaming his wife for driving away a potential daughter-in-law and grandchildren with her cruelty. But I felt no satisfaction in their struggles. I had learned that true happiness doesn't come from other people's misery, it comes from building a life filled with love, purpose, and genuine connections. As I write this, James and Lily are 6 years old now, and Lance and I are expecting our third child, a little girl we plan to name Grace. The children are excited about becoming big siblings, and Lance has already started converting his home office into a nursery. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret not fighting harder for my marriage with Blake, or if I wonder what might have happened if his family had been more supportive. The answer is always no. That experience, as painful as it was, led me to the life I was meant to have. It taught me my own worth and showed me what real love looks like. The Thompson family got exactly what they deserved, the consequences of their own cruelty and short-sightedness. I didn't need to plot revenge or seek retribution. Life took care of that all on its own, while I was busy being happy. And that, I think, is the most satisfying revenge of all.